Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast. The disappointing Timberwolves loss to the Phoenix Suns on Wednesday night. Hard fought. The Wolves led at halftime. They led early in the third quarter. We'll talk about what happened in that second half that allowed this thing to kind of slip away from the Wolves. Also, what went well. I mean, it was a generally good cat game, a good ant game. We'll break down both sides of the floor and the biggest takeaways from this one as the Wolves failed to gain additional ground in the Western Conference playoff race. It's all coming to the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Thursday, everybody. And disappointing Wolves loss Wednesday to the Suns. It was a golden opportunity to really move into fifth place with a chance at fourth place had the Timberwolves won, or I guess technically a tie for fifth place. But unfortunately, the Wolves now have lost the potential tiebreaker to the Suns. They are, still in the 7th spot in the West. And yet it was a good game. The Wolves played hard, despite the Suns being a really difficult matchup. And I want to break down why it's so difficult for the Wolves to match up against the Suns as part of today's show. We'll do individual studs and duds later, the whole thing here on the post-game pod. First of all, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. You can find this show and all the other Minnesota podcasts on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, and that's downloadable on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Again, download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV to watch this show and all the other Minnesota Locked On shows. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at my account, which is at Beecken, and that's with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. All right, so the stakes in this one, of course, are high. I mean, there's only 5 regular season games left now after this game, so of course they were. Like, it's redundant to say that. However, the way that the Western Conference breaks out, a win would have put the Timberwolves into still a tie with Golden State for 6th. However, the Wolves would have had the tiebreakers. So they would have been technically alone in 6th. They would have been only a half game behind the Clippers for 5th with that tiebreaker, and only a game behind the Suns for 4th with that tiebreaker had the Wolves won this game. Unfortunately, they lost. And now they're a game behind Golden State. They've split the season series with Golden State. And now the conference record, after the Warriors won last night, the Wolves only have a half-game lead in conference record, which is the 3rd tiebreaker. So the Wolves are 7th. If the Warriors win their next game and the Wolves lose their next game, it's going to be really hard to get back out of that play-in with just 4 on the schedule. At the risk of sounding like a completely broken record, every game is so massive moving forward. And here's the thing. The Wolves competed in this one against the Suns. Minnesota was up by 3 points at halftime. I thought it was a really well-played first half. The first quarter was sloppy offensively, but the second quarter was really, really good. It was one of the better all-around quarters we've seen for the Wolves. I mean, obviously, they've been on a 4-game win streak, but this was just against a really good team on the road. Emotional. Kevin Durant, home debut after returning from the injury, missing the last 3 weeks with the sprained ankle. And McDaniel's playing great defense on him early. Ant playing great defense on Durant early when he was on him. And the Wolves offense, the second unit, Nas, everything just kind of humming. Cat had a massive, I think he had 12 points in the second quarter, 20 points at halftime after sitting out on Monday in Sacramento. And the Wolves were up 3 at halftime. But the story of the game, the headline here, was the Timberwolves turnovers and sloppy offense. I know people want to talk about the officiating. We'll get there. But to me, it was the turnovers and the sloppy offense that have to be the headliner in this one. I mean, the Wolves turned the ball over 21 times in this game. This is like a November, December Timberwolves showing in terms of lack of taking care of the basketball. 21 turnovers for the Wolves. The Phoenix Suns had 8 turnovers in this game. 6 from Rudy Gobert, which is an ungodly number for a guy who touches the ball very rarely. He shot the ball 5 times in this game. Now, of course, I believe 5 of those, maybe 4 of those were offensive fouls. I mean, he committed 5 fouls in this game. I think 4 of his 5 fouls were offensive. So 4 of his 6 turnovers would then be offensive fouls. Cat committed 6 turnovers, a couple of those offensive fouls as well. Kyle Anderson, 5 turnovers. So Towns, Gobert, and Anderson combined to commit 17 of the Timberwolves' 21 turnovers in this game. And the Suns as a team only committed 8 turnovers. That's the headline. And the offense was a little disjointed, but like it didn't. It's crazy because on Monday against Sacramento, what did the Wolves have? 6 turnovers in that, or 8 turnovers total in that game, I think. I'm going to pull it up real quick. It was like 8, 9, 10 turnovers, something like that. They had 6 turnovers on Monday in Sacramento. Rudy Gobert alone had 6 turnovers in this game. Karl-Anthony Towns alone had 6 turnovers in this game. And this game was played at a still a high pace, but not quite the pace of that Kings game on Sunday. I mean, the Suns are happy to play however you want to play, but they're comfortable slowing the game down. It's one of the reasons why it's a tough matchup for the Wolves. But Minnesota committed 21 turnovers. The Suns committed 8. Just 2 days after Minnesota committed 6 turnovers at Sacramento. And the offensive fouls are a huge part of it, and that's what makes it feel so disjointed, right? And at least, I guess, if there's a silver lining here, they're dead ball turnovers, right? You're not allowing transition points the other way, at least not easy transition points the other way if it's a dead ball turnover. But they're also completely unnecessary. And most of them were legitimate calls. And we can complain. I'll complain a little about the officiating. But I think all but maybe one of the moving screens that were called on the Wolves were legitimate offensive fouls. Now, my gripe, of course, is that you could call a moving screen on almost every possession on almost every team in the entire league, and certainly on Rudy Gobert. It's almost Kevin Garnett syndrome where he'd get called once or twice a game. But basically, every time he's setting a screen by the letter of the law, it's illegal. It's just the officials are picking and choosing when they're going to call it. And that's what drives me absolutely crazy. Like, if you don't like it, explain it and say, hey, you can't do this anymore. And like, obviously nobody would like this, but call it a bunch of times in a row. I guess a game like this, and maybe a player changes what he does. Rudy's not going to change though, because this is how he sets screens. He gets called for it usually once or twice a game, but in this game, for whatever reason, the whistles just kept coming and coming and coming. But that was the biggest issue. It wasn't as much bad passing. I mean, Kyle Anderson had a couple of really bad plays mixed in. And Cat had a couple, like the one right before halftime that didn't burn the Wolves, where the Wolves actually stopped the Suns with like 18 seconds left, could go back the other way, but Towns just threw it directly to Devin Booker, trying to outlet pass to Ant. And the Suns thankfully didn't score. But like, it's plays like that they didn't make on Monday in Sacramento. And they managed to beat a good Kings team on the road by 4 points. But then they made those mistakes against another good team on the road on Wednesday and ended up losing by 7. So turnovers to me are problem 1A, or the thing you would point to as the biggest issue in this game. And Finch has talked a couple different times about reintegrating Karl-Anthony Towns and making sure the Wolves aren't ball stopping. I actually don't think ball stopping was a problem at all in this game. I thought Cat still picked his spots well. I thought Ant, for the most part, picked his spots well. We'll talk a little more about Ant's performance later. I didn't have a huge problem with the shot selection. It was really more at times overpassing. At times, Finch is always trying to get the Wolves to push the pace. I feel like sometimes it was to their detriment in this game, only because they were just, I mean, like, it's a bit of a chicken or the egg, right? Because part of the reason they were so sloppy is because they were trying to play fast. But if you just make a better pass, then like it's not a big deal. Like, you could say it's just complete breakdowns, trying to get out in transition, secondary break. The Wolves did not take advantage very often, and some sloppy half court passing too. Those are the biggest issues in this game. I do want to talk free throw discrepancy, and yes, the officiating was not great, but the Timberwolves bear some blame here for only shooting 12 free throws in this game. And I'll explain why here in just a minute. And then after that, I've got a couple other takeaways. We'll talk about some individual performances, and then we will get to individual studs and duds here in the final segment, as we always do on the post-game podcast. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at Ultimate GM. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is the coolest game that I played in a long time. I've always thought I could be a great NBA GM. As it turns out, it's not all that easy. If you've had the same thought and have fantasized about managing your own basketball franchise, go ahead and download Ultimate Pro Basketball GM right now. The game allows you to manage every strategic aspect of a franchise, playing through seasons and leading your franchise and fans to glory as you build a historic dynasty. In the simulation, you're responsible for dealing with challenging personalities, both players and coaches, hiring the right coaches and assistants, trading and training players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency, the draft, all the ups and downs of multiple seasons, and so on and so forth. All this is in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is completely free and playable offline. You can also play on the go as you want and when you want to. There's currently a Locked On NBA host league ongoing. You better believe it's competitive. There's plenty of franchises, just like the Timberwolves, who are plenty of hosts that are covering woebegone franchises, if you will. And you can tell they really want it in this Locked On league. I mean, the hosts of the worst teams are the ones that this is super important to them to perform well at Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. Locked On Wolves listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On in the game store. Make sure to check it out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you can scan the code on your screen right now. You can also look it up on the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, a couple additional takeaways in this game. We definitely do have to address the free throw discrepancy, but I'm going to take maybe what's an unpopular angle among Timberwolves faithful. And I don't talk about officiating a ton. I try and be very level-headed, balanced, objective on this podcast, and I think I do a fairly good job of that. So I'm going to come out and say this. Like, the officiating wasn't great. And I know Chris Finch talked about it after the game, and rightfully so. I think you have to when the other team has more than twice as many free throws as you. But the Wolves didn't go to the basket quite enough in this game. And on a quick, okay, well, let's start here. So the free throw discrepancy was 27 for the Suns. The Suns shot 27 free throws. The Timberwolves shot 12. Devin Booker alone shot 15 free throws in this game. The Timberwolves shot 12. Anthony Edwards attempted only 3 free throws. Karl-Anthony Towns attempted 2, and Rudy Gobert attempted 2. So the 3 Timberwolves players that played the most and the 2 Timberwolves players who shot the ball the most, Edwards and Cat, combined to attempt 39 field goals in this game and combined to attempt 5 free throws. Now, there is something wrong there. I don't know that it's any different than any other game when the Wolves get a bad whistle. And maybe I should have led with that because that'll be a more popular opinion, right? But it's true. I 100% think it's true. I'm on record lots talking about this. The Wolves don't get a good whistle. They don't. And it's a vicious cycle, as I've said before. So bear with me if you've heard me say this, but the Wolves get a bad whistle. They complain, I'll just say, incessantly about it. And they lead the league in technical fouls, in flagrant fouls, and ejections. And they complain about it incessantly. They get penalized probably even more unfairly for complaining about it. And then because of that, they get this reputation that, oh, these guys complain all the time. So they get more technicals, and then they complain more because then they get more personal fouls called as well. And it really is a vicious cycle. And the Wolves are in part to blame. It is mostly the fault of the officials. Like, you can't let this stuff, you can't profile teams. It's not fair to blanket, guys like Mike Conley, who've literally never gotten a technical in their lives, are pretty frustrated and feel like the Wolves don't get a good whistle. Like, that's obvious. Guys who are new to the team, Kyle Anderson, even Taurean Prince, I know he's around last year, but everybody seems to kind of understand, like, oh, we're the Wolves, so, we don't get a great whistle. And it doesn't have to be that way, and it's pretty frustrating. I don't know that this game was any different than any other, and the Wolves were in part culpable because they didn't shoot the ball in the paint enough in this game. I went back and looked, and if my like, this isn't an official count, this is my kind of freehand counting this. The Wolves had 13, the Wolves were outshot in the paint, not outscored. The Suns shot 13 shot attempts in the paint in the first quarter. The Wolves had 11. Second quarter, which was actually the Wolves' best quarter, they were out attempted in the paint 17-12. 17-12. The third quarter, it was 12-7. So the Wolves were a minus through 3 quarters just in terms of field goal attempts. Again, this is not points, this is attempts. The Wolves were a minus 12 in field goal attempts in the paint. They actually played it to a draw, 11-11 in the fourth quarter. So this is not official. Again, my freehand count here, going back and looking real quickly and double checking it against the shot chart, actually the ESPN shot chart, which is mostly accurate. Either way, the Suns attempted way more shots in the paint. So whether it was 10 or 9 or 11 or 12 or 8, it was more. The Suns shot the ball in the paint more often, and that's a big reason why. And of course, if you get fouled and it's not an and one, it doesn't count as a field goal attempt. I get that, but this is a pretty good, I don't know, snapshot of the team, which team was more aggressive. And the Wolves shot 35 threes. The Suns shot 20 threes. And that's how it should have been. The Suns don't shoot a ton of threes. The Wolves do, or they'd like to. So that balance isn't too wacky, but like that, when, almost half of your shot attempts, 35 of 90 shot attempts for the Wolves are from three, and only 20 of 96 for the Suns are from three. Of course, the team that's shooting more twos is going to get to the line more often. Now, the Suns also shoot more 2-point mid-range shots, non-paint twos, if you will, than any other team in the league. And that was a big reason why they ultimately won this game, because they're so good on non-paint twos. They've got three of the best mid-range shooters this generation in Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Chris Paul. They also did get into the paint more often. And it's not really the Suns' game, right? Like, it's not really what they do. It's what Kevin Durant does, and to a lesser extent, Devin Booker. But Booker shooting 15 free throws in this game. 15 free throws for Devin Booker, 12 free throws for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And I mean, just skimming Devin Booker's game log, he shot 15 free throws in a game 2 other times this year. So this ties his season high for free throw attempts in a game. He shot double-digit free throw attempts a total of 4 times in the month of March. He shot double-digit free throws 0 times in February. I know he had an injury that spanned January into the first part of February. Going back to December, he shot double-digit free throws twice in a month. So this isn't like a James Harden prime James Harden example. This is Booker gets the line quite a bit, but usually not quite this much. And I know the Wolves have a reputation for fouling, but that's part of my gripe, is that I actually don't think they were any more, handsy or physical in this game than they are in any other night. And yet the Suns still end up shooting 40 free throws in this game. Or excuse me, that was the Kings the other night, shot 40. What was it? 35, I think, in this game. 27 free throws in this game. I don't know. That was a big issue. And the Wolves are partly to blame. The officiating is partly to blame. Credit the Suns for being aggressive, but that, to me, that really stuck out. In general, though, I thought the Wolves were pretty good defensively, especially early in this game, but the Suns kind of kept it their game. Booker hit some tough shots. I mean, both Jaden McDaniels and Ant did a great job guarding Devin Booker early in this game. They did a great job guarding Kevin Durant early in this game. I thought Mike Conley was pretty good, not quite as good defensively as he was against Golden State and Sacramento earlier this week. But McDaniels and Ant, so I was a little surprised by this. McDaniels guarded Booker to start the game mostly, and Ant was mostly guarding Kevin Durant. They both did a good job. They both did a really good job. And then as the game wore on, Booker kind of got it going. Durant didn't until he made that wide open three when Kyle Anderson was guarding him and was trying to help on, I think it was Chris Paul actually, and didn't get recovered a KD in time. And KD knocked down the three from the top of the arc. And then from that point on, it was all bets are off with Kevin Durant. Now, still, he didn't look like the normal version of Kevin Durant that we're used to seeing. This was more about Devin Booker, and then also Chris Paul, pick and roll game down the stretch. Really kind of, he's a master of the pick and roll, right? And he showed that. We've seen this time and time again where he slows the game down to his pace and he hits a big three, which he did in this game, or he, throws a ridiculous pocket pass, which he did in this game. I think it was him to DeAndre Ayton for a couple of big baskets down the stretch. So the Suns are a tough matchup for the Wolves. They're aggressive offensively. They have enough talent defensively, enough size with guys like Ayton, and talent with guys like Josh Okogie and Durant and Chris Paul if they lock in. Like, this is just a tough team, and they're so good with non-paint twos. They're so good from the mid-range, and the Wolves are bad at defending that because of play drop coverage so often, fouling a lot, falling for pump fakes, etc. The Wolves did play well on the glass in this game, which was a key that I had for this one. The Wolves ended up being a +6 on the glass, which is nice. But it just, guarding the mid-range is not a strong suit of the Wolves, and it is scoring from the mid-range is very much a strong suit of the Phoenix Suns. All right, let's close the show here today by looking at individual studs and duds. We're going to do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The college basketball tournament is heating up. Of course, the Final Four game and then also the championship is this weekend. There's no better place to get in on the action than our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no sweat first bet. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which team will be cutting down the nets. It's all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Don't miss your shot at a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right, let's close this thing out with individual studs and duds. I thought for the Wolves, Anthony Edwards was probably the best all-around player on the floor. I know Cat was so good in the first half, and it's not entirely his fault he didn't do much more in the second half. The Wolves just didn't get the ball in his hands quite as often, although they tried. I do want to point that out. Okay, let's start with Cat. I'm not saying this is in no particular order. I occasionally will do this where I do them in order, like best player, second best, and sometimes I don't. I'm going to do them out of order today, so that's my disclaimer here. Let's talk about Cat first, because he scored 20 in the first half. He had 12 in the second quarter, and only shot, I think had 5 shot attempts in the second half. The Wolves tried to run some of those flare screens, pin downs, trying to get him 3-point opportunities, or at least clean catches where he can shoot the three or pump fake and drive. And the Suns played it better. Give them credit. They were switching a bunch of stuff that, Kogi was mucking things up like a Kogi does, and Wolves fans are very aware of that. And then Cat was also just a little indecisive in the second half. And credit to him for, I don't think he forced too much. Now, 10 of his 17 shot attempts were threes, which is fine because he was red hot from three and he's got to shoot more threes. But he didn't put the ball on the floor and drive quite as much. He had a couple of nice baskets early doing that. But he only got to the free throw line twice in this game. He shot 10 threes, only 7 2-pointers. And he did have the 6 turnovers, and a couple were moving screens. I don't think he was called for any charges or off arm, initiating contact with the ball as an offensive foul, which is, I actually think he's improved a little bit of that. I guess we've seen him 3 times now since coming back from the calf, but that was such a big issue the last couple of seasons for him. And that wasn't his number one issue in this game. So I thought Cat played well. He is one of my studs for this game. And again, I don't put all the blame on him for not getting more shot attempts in the second half, but he was certainly more aggressive in the first half. And the decision maker was maybe a little better then as well. My number one stud, I thought the best player for the Wolves in this one was Anthony Edwards. It was kind of a slow drip for him to get to his 31 points. There was never this ant rush or this push from Anthony Edwards. He had a couple of buckets late. But in general, I thought he played well. 31 points, 13 of 22 shooting, only 3 of 9 on threes, 6 assists, 1 steal, 1 block, only 1 turnover. And in a game when Gobert, Towns, and Anderson combined to turn it over 17 times, to have Edwards handle the ball as much as he did and play 40 minutes and only turn it over once is impressive. Now, he had 0 rebounds in 40 minutes, which is, he's going to be kicking himself when he sees that box score. I mean, that's like a first or second year Andrew Wiggins box score is what that is. So that's not good, but he did a lot of other stuff well. And by the way, the Wolves were a plus on the glass. I said that earlier, so it didn't bite them too much. Although the Suns did get some big offensive rebounds late, and you could go back and watch, and I'm sure we could point the finger at Ant on some of those possessions. But in general, a good Anthony Edwards game. I thought he played well and was probably the Wolves' best all-around player on the floor in this one. Third stud has to be Naz Reid. He's actually the only other Timberwolves player who scored in double figures. The Wolves had 31 from Ant, 25 from Cat, 15 from Naz. Nobody else scored more than 7 for the Wolves in this game. Naz had 15 on 5 of 13 shooting, 2 of 3 outside the arc, 3 of 5 at the line. He led the Wolves in free throw attempts with 5 free throw attempts in 23 minutes, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, and a block, only 1 turnover. Naz was very good early, had another good stint in the second half, had a couple of bunnies right at the rim, go around the rim and out. He missed a couple of layups. He also had a 3-pointer go in and out. So some bad luck there. He does just have to finish those at the rim, but he's hardly the only one to blame when it comes to missing easy shots ever, but also in this game. But I thought it was a good Naz game. I thought he was pretty good defensively too. Thought he was active. Just continues to be a really solid player. And I mean, has to see the floor as much as possible. And this is probably about the best we can hope for, obviously, unless there's foul trouble for Towns or Gobert. but 23 minutes. What did he play? 21 the other night. What did he play in Sacramento? He played, 21 against Sacramento. So like low 20s is probably what we're going to get most nights from Naz, but he was very good in those minutes in this one. Duds in this game, I'm not going to give one to Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He only played 5 minutes, didn't record a stat. I guess he had a rebound, but I don't know. He didn't really do much. I'll go Kyle Anderson. And you can make an argument for Mike Conley too, but I'll go Kyle Anderson. 6 points, 10 rebounds. He was the second leading rebounder on the Wolves, 2 assists, 2 blocks, but he did have 5 turnovers, shot just 3 of 9. Now, to be fair, he was questionable. The injury report added with an illness, so I'm sure he was feeling terrible under the weather. So I want to point that out, but not his best performance. At least he was active on the glass. But when Ant has 0 rebounds, Kyle Anderson's got to grab 10. I mean, like somebody's got to gobble those up. Conley also not a great game. 7 points, 9 rebounds, which by the way, he was the third leading rebounder on the Timberwolves. 4 assists, 1 steal. Only 1 turnover, but he was just 3 of 13 shooting, 1 of 7 outside the arc. So he was 2 of 6 on 2-pointers, 1 of 7 on threes for Conley, and just not his best performance. So in general, not a bad game from the Wolves, just a really sloppy kind of most of the second half, I guess, really after the first part of the third quarter was gone. It was pretty sloppy for the Wolves. And that was the biggest thing. The turnovers, not being able to defend without fouling, not getting to the line themselves. And that was kind of the overall story from this one. And now the Wolves are by themselves in 7th place in the Western Conference. They're only a half game up on the Lakers, who won. Lakers won on Wednesday. So Minnesota's a half game up on LA, and they play the Lakers on Friday night, a massive game. I don't know. Every single game is a massive game, but Friday's going to be a ton of fun against the Lakers. If you missed the live postcast that we do with Marnie Gellner after the majority of Wolves games, that is the last episode on whatever audio platform you're listening to. If you're on YouTube, go find it on Locked On Sports Minnesota. We will not have the live postcast Friday after the Lakers game, and likely will not have it Sunday either, but we'll be back at it next week after this weekend's games. We will, of course, have the show on Friday. So we'll do the regular Friday morning show, and we'll preview Wolves Lakers Friday night, among other things. So be sure to tune into that. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, you can find this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also watch on YouTube and on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now you can make your second listen the Game to Game NBA podcast every moment, every top performance, and every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.